Thursday afternoon, and it's time to have a chat with Mark Latham. He joins me on the phone. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Brent. How you going?
I'm all right, mate. How was your week?
Pretty good, thanks. Pretty good. Having a close look at Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore, which was fascinating.
It's official now. It's come out today that the President has been formally nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by two Norwegian politicians.
Oh, well, good on him. And if his plan for the Korean Peninsula comes off, he certainly deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. The last president to win it was Obama. He'd only been in office for 5 minutes and hadn't done anything.
That's true.
And got the gong. So I think Trump would be a bit more deserving if it all pans out the right way.
Well, he has, no pun intended, trumpeted his achievement after this historic summit. He has used every positive word he can possibly find to describe how it all went.
Well, he has, but it's also got a fair way to go. The significance is not so much in the eradication of the nuclear weapons. It's got to be part of a package where North Korea becomes a regular part of the global community, because the big problem they've had is that with their hermit kingdom approach, isolationist economics, they haven't been able to feed their people. The people in North Korea, you know, there's barely electricity, cars, and the poor buggers have to eat the bark off the trees. So the only way in which the regime there has been able to hold the support of the people is to rattle the sabre, to say, oh, our country's under attack, we need the nuclear weapons, we're taking the military approach, the United States is the big threat. Well, what we're hoping, and this is the Trump plan, is that if they can open up their economy, get some investment in there, go down the Chinese path of prosperity, they don't need the nuclear weapons to bind the support of the people to their totalitarian government. Prosperity will do the trick for them. That's been the Chinese experience. And on the flip side of the Trump approach in Singapore, you can see in the financial pages that North Korea is taking the first steps to opening up its economy, inviting investment from China, South Korea and the United States, establishing special economic zones and tourism opportunities. So if they can establish prosperity, they don't need the nuclear weapons, and the world's better off all round.
Mark, what's your thoughts on, I mean, Kim Jong-un, there he was, shaking hands, being patted on the back, welcomed really a bit like a rock star in Singapore. I mean, the guy's a war criminal. I mean, he should have been in The Hague.
Well, he's done some terrible things, that's true. But, you know, you've also got to have a hard head about international diplomacy. If we'd said that about Chairman Mao in China, they'd still be locked away in isolation, and you wouldn't have had all those people in China lifted out of poverty. You wouldn't have had the prosperity of nations that have traded into China. So, you know, to some extent, coming from a different country as Trump does, he can't rewrite North Korean history. What he can do is try and bring them into the global community, and as they become, you know, an open economy, more prosperous, there's no need for all those human rights violations, all the oppression to try and get people to support the regime. Prosperity does it for them. So that you know, it really is somewhat similar to Nixon meeting with Chairman Mao and then China becoming part of the world. And this is on a smaller scale. North Korea is nowhere near as important as China. But if you allow the reputation of dictators to define what you do, well, you'd never bring these countries into the global community, and you miss a big opportunity.
It's early days, but Trump has done more than any other president's been able to do.
Well, he has, and I think the really encouraging thing is the news. It's a bit buried away in the financial pages, the news that North Korea is wanting to take overseas investment and grow its economy the proper way. You know, the isolationism they've had, being a hermit kingdom, has been a disaster for the North Korean people. So if they can achieve prosperity, you get rid of the nuclear weapons, Australia's better off. We can trade into North Korea, a new trading opportunity we haven't had in the past, and most importantly, we wouldn't be within their orbit of aspirations for firing off missiles and nuclear weapons. So, you know, the world's a more prosperous and safer place, and I know this Kim Jong-un, he's been a terrible so-and-so in many respects, but you've got to move forward and you've got to make the world a better place.
And that's what Donald Trump said when he got back to American soil. He tweeted that you'll sleep a lot safer tonight as a result of our summit in Singapore.
Well, a way to go. You know, let's have a look at that tweet in a couple of years' time when they have got rid of the nuclear weapons. The investment is pouring in. They're building tourism facilities. They're trading as a proper economy. It's promising, but it's just the start. We can't get too carried away at this early stage.
Now, the Turnbull government is considering this is in the paper today, a basic conversational English test as a requirement for migrants to becoming Australian citizens. This is a watered-down version of what they originally wanted, isn't it?
Well, it's a different approach. The earlier approach was about citizenship, that to become an Australian citizen, you needed to pass an English language test. What they're now saying is that to come into the Australian nation to achieve permanent residency, you need to have some basic English skills. And some of the statistics are very alarming, because in 1981 there were 300,000 Australians with little or no English. That's now grown to over 800,000, and in 3 years' time it'll reach 1 million. So how did this ever happen? How did we get to a scenario where in just a couple of years' time 1 million Australians won't have decent conversational English? Because one of the principles of building a proper community and integration is that people can talk to each other. And English is the national language, and there should have been better attention to this in the past. So what the government is saying now, I think, is good, but they've got to do other things to ensure that every Australian can talk to their neighbour, the person up the road, their workmate. You can visit places that have got a high migrant population and they speak English. You can actually converse with them, you know. I've been to parts of Western Sydney where you go into the shops and if you order in English, you won't, receive the goods or services you're after because no one speaks English. So it's bad for their economic opportunities. It encourages ethnic enclaves when people don't speak English. It encourages welfare dependency. It's been a real problem, and they've got to turn it around as fast as they can.
I read somewhere today, Mark, that they may not get the support of the opposition, though.
Well, why not? I mean, surely we would all abide by the principle that every Australian is better off if we can talk to other Australians. Why would we ever want a part of the community that can't speak the national language, can't converse with their fellow Australian citizens and residents, and because of that, end up living a life in an ethnic enclave that's no different to where they've come from? They might as well be back in their home country for the low level of integration into Australia. Now, if it takes English language classes, if it takes incentives or the big stick in the welfare system to say that if you haven't learnt English after 18 months, you don't receive the welfare payments, I think that's where we've got to head, because the original aspiration of multiculturalism, when Whitlam and Fraser talked about it in the 70s, wasn't for a whole group of ethnic communities to live in isolation in a part of Western Sydney, unable to communicate with other Australians. It was for people to be integrated and mixing and blending in and talking to each other, getting to know each other, because quite frankly, if they can't speak English, it builds a lot of suspicions as to what these people are up to. And if they live in isolation and can't mix with other Australians, then you're not really a community, are you? You're not really a society.
No, not at all. Not in any way, shape or form.
So it's an amazing statistic. At least the government's being honest to say that in 2021 there'll be 1 million Australians who haven't got decent conversational English. They can't talk to their fellow Australians. I just think that's appalling, and it should never have come to this.
It shouldn't, and it's just an awful figure, isn't it, to think that 1 million people who live here can't speak English.
And they're encouraged, because of that, to really live a life removed from the Australian mainstream, to be in ethnic enclaves no different to the countries that they've come from, with their own language, the signage, community radio in their home language. And what about their kids? How do their kids go at school? I pay tribute to many of the European and Asian migrants who've come here, who've recognised that learning English is important for the education of their children and their grandchildren. And if you haven't got that in the home, the kids are up against it. And this is how unemployment and welfare passes from one generation to the next. So it's essential at so many levels. And it's not a tough demand, is it? I imagine, if I went to live in Italy, I would think, well, I'm here and enjoying Italian lifestyle. I've got to learn Italian.
That's right.
To be part of this country. Right. If I lived in China, I'd think, well, I've got to speak Chinese if I want to be part of this country. So it's not that big a demand. And English, of course, is very much an international language. So it's an appalling statistic. Good on the government for flushing it out there, but they've got to do things on many, many fronts to overcome this massive national problem.
Okay, the federal government's going to adopt, I think this is news that's come out in the last couple of days, the federal government will adopt 104 of the 122 formal recommendations made by the Royal Commission into institutional child sexual abuse. Of course, the Commission, Mark, was established in 2013 and it's heard years of evidence from abuse survivors and families. The findings report was handed to the government in December last year, so it's taken them a while, but they've accepted 104 of the 122 recommendations.
Well, I think that's good. It has been a cleansing process at many levels. The victims have felt at last their stories are being heard and government authorities are taking notice of them. A lot of pressure has come onto the Catholic Church in particular to reform its practices. And, you know, I think the most contentious recommendation here is that the confessional box should no longer be secret. If there's a perpetrator who admits in confession to child sexual abuse, the priest would have an obligation to report that. Now, there's, you know, people for religious reasons saying, well, that can't happen, the confessional is sacred. But I think we've got to be level-headed and fair here. You know, we make some criticisms of Islam, for instance, of having out-of-date practices that need to be modernised. I think this is a practice of the Catholic Church that needs to come up to date. And when you're talking about the welfare of little kids and giving them a guarantee that they spend their day without anyone interfering with them, they go to bed safely at night, I think that's absolutely paramount. And I think it would be a very good thing if the Catholic Church said, look, this is an outdated practice, probably the celibacy of their priests is an outdated practice too, and try and modernise their institution in response to the horrific findings of this Royal Commission.
Very true, very true. The University of Melbourne, I read this and I thought, what? The University of Melbourne faces calls to cancel a divisive dance performance that separates white audience members from people of colour, makes white patrons sign a declaration before entering the theatre, and then stops the dance when they take their seats. What's this all about?
Well, Brent, it's hard to believe this is happening in Australia in 2018, that you would go into a theatre and there's someone there who looks at you and tries to sift through your racial appearance and then segregates you on the basis of how you look. Now, say you're of mixed heritage, how do they sort out whether you're white, black or Asian? And say your partner is of a different racial background, husband and wife would be separated into different segregated pens. If their skin's dark enough, they get to go in the cinema. If their skin's a light complexion, they stay in the foyer. And four of the performers then come out and abuse the people to say you've got too much white privilege and you've got to sign sort of a declaration that you repent. So this is the sort of thing, racial sifting and segregation, that you associate with Nazi Germany. How is this happening in Australia in a university system that's publicly funded? I just find it the most appalling thing. And I've got to say, coming from my background, which for a long while was in the Labor Party, I feel as angry and shamed for Australia about this stuff as when I first learned about slavery. I first understood apartheid in South Africa. How is it different? How is it happening in our country? And where's the federal government to say it can't happen anymore? If you have segregation of any kind on a university campus with public money, you won't get that money into the future. We expect an integrated, cohesive society where people don't worry about skin colour, we just get on with the performance, and building it around the humiliation of white people is a form of racism, and it's totally unacceptable.
But do you see where is it here? The University of Melbourne's Faculty of Fine Arts and Music Acting Dean said the dance piece was provocative and exciting.
Well, you can say anything is art. You know, maybe the regime in South Africa, the apartheid regime, said, oh, this is just one big artistic performance. And don't worry about the fact that we're humiliating and attacking and in some cases killing black people. Maybe slavery in the United States, they didn't need a civil war. They go, oh, this is all just artistic performance. The dean of that faculty is an imbecile. And to hide behind artistic creativity, he should be ashamed of himself that the creativity involves racial segregation and anti-white racism. He should be absolutely ashamed of what he's presiding over, and he's the sort of person who's not fit to run anything in the public education system.
Well said. That's why we're
I just get so angry about this, because it's so fundamentally wrong, and it's counter to all the traditions in Australia. We've made so much progress in forgetting about race, in becoming... internationally, they do all the surveys, and Australia is a beacon of racial tolerance and understanding among its people. Why would we go back to racial segregation, this time attacking white people? It makes zero sense, and for goodness sake, I hope we get a government that can clamp down on it.
All right, I've got to go to the news. We always thank you for your time and enjoy having a chat each and every Thursday. You have a good week, and we'll talk to you next week.
You too. Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Mark. Bye-bye.